just going to introduce myself briefly, and we're going to get right into it. My name is Nachliel Sullivan, born and bred in Jerusalem, in the Old City. After 7 years of teaching in the States and doing tours in museums, mostly in the States, but also in other parts, like in Canada, Europe, and in Israel, over the past 4 years, I've just moved back to Israel, and I'm sort of transitioning. And my father's coming in right now. That's going to be, wow, we'll be nervous. Just kidding. So this is where I grew up, and I'm going to share with you as we go also some stories and connections, because a lot of this became relevant to me and a passion of mine because it's my background, because I grew up literally on top of Hezekiah's wall, which my father who just joined us is actually somehow right on top of it. So that's like Assyria is my backyard, and that was really the gateway to my interest in archaeology and history and museums in general, was through Assyria. So today's presentation, today's virtual tour is called The Age of Empires, The Rise of Assyria, or the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And we're going to be, let me just share my screen. Okay, so you should all be able to see my screen. And we're going to be visiting the British Museum, which has some of the best collections of Assyrian art in the world. Thankfully, it's been saved from the destruction of ISIS and a lot of the crisis that's been going on in the hometown of these artifacts, and mostly in Iraq. So you can go and visit them in the British Museum, and might be able to throw in another museum. So let's get started. Before we go into the museum, which is going to be a combination of Google Earth or Google Street View and a slideshow. So forgive me if I'm bouncing between screens, but that's really the only way I can do this. So you have like the text and the visuals in high resolution. I'm going to give you a little bit of background so you know what we're talking about, when we're talking about, where we're talking about, and then we're going to go straight into it. So the picture you're seeing right now is just a screenshot that I played around with from the British Museum. So we're going to get there very soon, just so you know where we're going. So this is a screenshot of the map of the ground floor of the British Museum. And it's a big museum, so it's helpful to know our way around. We're going to be focusing on 3 parts of the museum, one of them really briefly, and then the other 2 for the rest of the tour. So the first part, which I just highlighted, is called Enlightenment. And this is really about Victorian England and how the British Museum was founded, and all kinds of cool collections that are based on themes in parts of the world. So there's Greek, Roman, there's Egyptian, there's writings, there's the birth of modern archaeology, and all that stuff. So I'm going to show that to you, just so hopefully when you go to the British Museum, you'll know to look out for that room, because it's very, very special. Our main part is going to be in these rooms, which are the Middle East. Rooms 6 through 10 are Assyria, before they became Neo-Assyrian Empire, which we'll explain, through very important stories like Hezekiah and the destruction of the city of Lachish and so on, which we'll get to. And one more, we're going to jump up at a certain point to the 3rd floor, and we're going to be looking at just a couple rooms here, rooms 54 and 55, which have to do with Assyria, and they're going to help us understand what Assyria is. So we're about to jump in. Just to be clear, what do we mean when we say Assyria? So here is a map of the ancient Near East, which is courtesy of the Babylonians Museum, Jerusalem. You can see on the bottom, and that's a great museum, and this is part of a publication for an exhibition called By the Rivers of Babylon, which is what you're looking at on the bottom right. There's an orange highlighted area in which there was an excavation which revealed Jewish documents would post the destruction of the Babylonian conquest of, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the conquest of Judah. So that's a separate issue, but this is an important map. I want to just point out where Assyria is. Assyria is right there on the Tigris River, on the Hidekel. And Ashur originally was the name of a god and a city, and eventually the entire empire and all of the countries that it conquered were considered to be an extension of the city of Assyria, and thus basically the glory of the god Assyria, which was manifest through these conquests in his honor. So this is what we're looking at. You're going to see that artifact in a moment. That's Assyria. And if you look to the bottom left, you're looking at Judea, or Judea and Samaria, Yehuda v'Shomron, which is the period of time in which we are in currently. There is a kingdom of Israel to the north, known as the 10 tribes, and the kingdom of Judah to the south, known as Yehuda. So that's the background. We'll get into that a little bit more. But considering that you can't really cross the desert, so Assyria is considered to be north, as is Babylon, because their access point into Judea is going to be through the north, even though they're technically to the east or northeast. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to take you now straight into the museum. Okay, can you all see the facade of the British Museum? Just thumbs up. So this screen share is working. All right, excellent. So we're looking at the entrance to the British Museum. Hang on, somebody else is trying to join. Okay, excellent. We have Gad Dishi from Efrat and Michal Schulman from Yeshiva of Flatbush in Brooklyn. Excellent. Okay, so we're looking at the front, the entrance. Of course, it looks like a Greek temple. It's supposed to look like enlightenment and so on, and we're going to go straight on. A few notes about the usage of Google Earth. Google Earth, let me show you. Hang on. We are already inside. So Google Earth, it's very useful to know if you're going to use this, and I encourage you to explore it now that so many museums are available virtually and many sites are as well. All of this blue highlight, these lines are what happens when you click on that little Google Earth character. And these little dots are people stood with their phone and did a 360, so you can sort of see, 360 degrees of this is the main hall and the ground floor, but you can't move around in these. Okay, so you need to go on the blue lines in order to move around. So let's move around, okay? Here we are in the entrance, and this is the fun part where you can get a little bit discombobulated. There's a control on the right that has all of the floors in which you need to be, and sometimes it's just gonna jump to the 5th floor, even though you're supposed to be on the ground floor or go to the basement. So you need to be aware of where you are so you don't, fall into all those glitches. So I'm going to go into enlightenment and hit 0. And we are here in the room of enlightenment, which when you walk in, it's to your right. So let's just move around a little bit so you get the gist of it. This is just by way of introduction. Just look at this beautiful place. You want to talk about enlightenment, learning from all the cultures of the world, collecting their artifacts and all the writings about them. It's just beautifully laid out. Each case there has something about the history of research, of archaeology. It's really fantastic. So I encourage you to come and look around, how they studied things. Oh, that's, yeah, all kinds of geographical tools and so on and so forth. I wanted to show you something which relates to our period of time. It's the other way around. You may recognize some famous Egyptian statues. You'll get to the Greek statues. Okay, and here we are. So we're looking at stuff that's a little more Near East. There's an Egyptian statue. There's also a replica of the Rosetta Stone right here. You can come right up close to it and touch it. So they do demonstrations here. And this is really cool. What you're looking at here, these little bricks, and there's some as well over here, are foundation bricks, which would be stamped with the name of the ruler in ancient Ur. So names such as Ur-Nama and so on, names from the time of Abraham. We're talking about like the Middle Bronze Age and even earlier, from the founders of the first cities in Mesopotamia. We're going to be looking at Mesopotamia, so we're going to see a lot of this cuneiform and a lot of this clay. But that was just by way of introduction. We don't really spend too much time here. I think the best way to skip around is to go to the real Rosetta Stone. So we don't drag ourselves around. This is the part we're going to be looking at. Let's go. Boom. And we are by the gift shop. Okay. And we're back on 4-3. Okay, here we are. We're right, let me close this. We are right in front of the actual Rosetta Stone, the real deal, the real McCoy. This is the Rosetta Stone, and you'll barely get a better look if you're in the museum actually, because it's so packed. People are constantly standing in front of it and taking pictures. But this is the famous Rosetta Stone from the town of Rosetta, from which Louis-Francois Champollion was able to decipher ancient hieroglyphics and the other hieratic script of the Egyptians, while there's the Greek here on the bottom. So this is really important to us, but we are actually going towards a different part. We are going towards Assyria. So let's begin. Hang on. I have to walk through walls here. Okay, here we are. Excellent. So Assyria. Look at these massive mythological creatures. We're going to get here in just a moment. So when we want to talk about Assyria, we need to recognize, first of all, who they were as a people and why they are so important. And we're going to get to that in just a bit. These monuments are from different parts of the Assyrian Empire, and they record different conquests and campaigns and so on, or they decorate them. And I want you just to see what Assyrian art looks like, Assyrian palace art and so on. So you'll recognize it when you see it and you'll never confuse it with something else. So moving up close, this little black obelisk has a very creative name. It's called the Black Obelisk. Hold on, letting a few people in. Okay. So the Black Obelisk, as well as there's also a white obelisk over here, named creatively for its color. We're going to get in a moment into what this is, but it records scenes of different campaigns which were done by different kings. Like this is Shalmaneser III, and there's a mention of a Jewish king in it. And here we have some other very important stelas which have different kings on them. We're going to see a few of them up close. Let's take a closer look. You see those camels? Let's move up. We're looking at some camels. Now, where do we have camels in the Assyrian Empire? We don't. The camels come from Arabia, and the Assyrians also campaigned to Arabia. And once they conquered Arabia and they sort of integrated that population into their vast empire, they had camels at their disposal, which was really helpful when they had to find a solution for invading Egypt. Once they got camels, they were able to invade Egypt, which is, by the way, never invaded before. But look, you see it an example. There's the king standing here with an attendant behind him, and there's all kinds of servants, and there's people who are captive with their hands tied behind their back. So they're really trying to display the power of the king and the extent of the empire, and also how everyone who he conquered is subjugated underneath him. So that's an important motif in Assyrian art. Now let's move up and take a look at some of these. Okay, I'm going to zoom in. Can you see it from here? All kinds of creatures and processions and so on. I want to get an angle on something that you usually can't see. Let me see if you can see it from here. Right over here, there's a person bowing down to the king. And I'm going to highlight that in just a moment on the slideshow. But this person bowing down is King Yehu, who we're going to mention. And King Yehu of Israel is bowing down to him. Now, it's important to recognize that in terms of the geography, when Assyria comes from Mesopotamia into Israel from the north, its first point of contact is the kingdom of Israel on its way south. And so the kingdom of Israel has a lot of dealings with Assyria, even before Assyria became especially expansionist and conquering, such as what's called the Neo-Assyrian Empire. I just see we have a question about the tablets of Gilgamesh epic at the museum. Good question. I was planning on showing that to you a little bit soon. Okay. And I don't know how to rename Astoria Shoal. I really don't know how to rename. What I can do is allow people to rename themselves, I guess. Allow participants. Okay, you can now rename yourself. I have that disabled because I have students, and they sometimes come up with creative names which should not be posted in public. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go back to our slideshow and take us to these. We were looking at a couple of these in the museum. So just as before we even get into what's called the Assyrian Empire, we've had previous contact with Assyria. And I'm just going to mention this so you can look this up in the future. It's helpful if you're a Navi teacher to know about these things, and I'm happy to recommend resources for this later. So the Kirk monolith of Shalmaneser, this is talking about Ahaz, son of Omri, who was a very big hitter in terms of the kingdom of Israel. And on top of it is all kinds of discs which are representing different gods. There's the moon god, there's the sun god, there's the lightning, the thunder god, and so on. And the king is going to be standing there sort of pointing at them, sort of appeasing them. So we're going to see a little bit more of that. And this black one on the right is the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III. We're going to see a little bit soon. We're going to see the Balawat gates and so on right behind us. And that king bowing down is Yehu ben Nimshi of Israel. And we've learned about him in terms of one who usurped the throne earlier on. This is way before, this is when Aram is more of the big bad boy in the neighborhood. Okay, but just so we have this piece just kind of zoomed in, this is the piece I was looking at. This is King Yehu bowing down. And this is a story, the technical term is, the academic term is extra biblical. It's not mentioned in Tanakh, it's mentioned outside of it. But that's because it's not important in terms of the narrative that Tanakh's trying to share and the moral issues. But it's important to know that we are a player on the stage, the geopolitical stage in the world at the time. Okay, what is this? So we're going to go right back into the museum, look a little bit more. Okay, now you're seeing this and it means something completely different. right? Look at all these mythical creatures, part lion, part eagle. You're going to see a lot of these guys. Okay, so looking up here, okay, these lamassu, notice how many legs they have. This is also a cool thing to do if you actually get to stand next to one. You notice how there are 2 legs in the front and 4 legs on the side. Now, there's actually a reason for that, which has to do with Assyrian art, which had a lot to do with points of view. And even in their 2-dimensional reliefs that we'll see, there's foreground, background, middle ground, there's a lot going on. So this is really cool. If I were able to move back, right, you're looking straight at this guardian mythological creature called a lamassu. It's standing guard, it's protecting. And this would be typically in the archway leading into another archway until you get to the king. And in fact, they'd play with their sizes to kind of mess with your perception, so you think that there's greater depth. So they did a lot of this stuff, like in the palace in Nineveh and in Nimrud. And so you're looking at him and he's just standing. But now if you move a little bit further in, let's see if I can do that. And you look at him, he's striding, he's moving, right? And it's not that there's a contradiction, it's just that it's 2 different points of view. If you're looking in front of it, he's standing guard. If you're walking between them, then they're marching, which is kind of cool. And you can see that it's a conglomerate of human, of lion, of eagle, and sometimes of bull. It depends which one it is. So it's really cool. It's really cool that you see this. You get to stand right between them. Now you're looking right now at, of course, a restored gate. This is called the Balawat Gate, and this is of Shalmaneser III. Now, Shalmaneser III is also earlier on. We're not going to be dealing with him directly, but he's a big hitter. He's an important guy. He's in the time, more or less, of Eliyahu Hanavi. And I see somebody asked, Ella, why the third? Why the third? There's been a Shalmaneser, the first and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. So we count them basically. He's the son of Ashur-nasir-pal II. So we have these names. Even Nebuchadnezzar is Nebuchadnezzar II, just like you have Ramses II. There's just kings use a certain name, and so you just say which one it is. So Shalmaneser III is from the 9th century. He's not really important to our story. But in any way, okay, so you're looking at this gate. Now, here's some more gates as well. Now, just to look closer up, right? You're coming to the palace. You're looking at a gate. You know, this is probably made from copper or bronze. And look at this. Look at the intricate detail of what's going on here. And I hope that by the end of this tour, you'll be able to identify Assyrian art by having seen so much of this. So I'm going to zoom in. You're looking here at some sort of citadel or fortified city. Here's archers on chariot being pulled by horse. They're fighting against people. And you're looking at a lot of archers lined up, and we're going to see more of those guys. But look how incredible it is, the amount of effort that they put in to kind of portray all this vibrance, all of this movement, and all of these conquests that they're doing. And so think about it. You're coming to visit the palace. Oh my gosh, here's people who are being impaled. And that's part of psychological warfare, which they would do. They'd impale people of the city, of the city or country they're going to battle against, and that would be psychological warfare. So, you know, Assyria, it sounds very nice, and you can watch Monty Python and say, what's the capital of Assyria? But at the end of the day, they were a very cruel empire, and we're gonna hear more about them. Here's an actual battle tank. They innovated tanks and so on. We're gonna get into that a little bit more. And we're gonna look at another one on this side. And there's more and more. We can look at this for hours, right? All the amazing scenes here. Sometimes it's just pastoral scenes, you know. Okay, that's gates. Now look at these gates. Now, when you read about the description of these gates, it tells you that they had the skin of the enemy that they conquered of the king hanging on the entrance to the door. So not so nice when you think about that. Now you're looking at it, massive ancient doors, but when you imagine how scary it was when you're coming to meet the Assyrian king and pay your taxes, and you see like, oh wow, that's the guy who rebelled against him. Not so much fun, right? So let's move in and see what's going on inside an Assyrian palace room, a palace. So in the Assyrian palace, there's many corridors, there's many rooms. Just take a look at some of the things that are going on, so you'll recognize them. So who is this guy in the center? Well, I couldn't tell you unless it was written, because all of the Assyrian kings look exactly the same. This is the king or the emperor, and we recognize him by the hat on his head. It's kind of like a Turkish fez. And it's true that in antiquity in general, the way you identify a person's importance is by his regalia, what he wears on his head. And so this is what the king would wear. They didn't really have crowns like we think about them. These are probably Apkalu or so on. These are sort of demons that protect him. They're sprinkling pine cones with oil on him, you know, for protection. And this is basically showing that the king is protected and is worthy and all of that stuff. Now, the cool thing about the king is that in Assyrian royal art, the king was in the embodiment of perfection. In other words, this wasn't a portrait, it was an idealized king. This is the perfect king with the curly beard and the long hair and the intricate garbs and the sword and the big buffed arms that you can, forearms that you can see in some of the pictures. This is an idealized king. Now, he could have been short and fat and tall and thin, and we just don't know, because what would survive is basically the propaganda showing us what the king looked like and how glorious and majestic he was. Look how many different types of angels are protecting him. They would even have statues like these buried underneath the ground in the doorway. Hopefully we'll get into there in a little bit. Okay, so let's move on. I don't want to bore you too much with this, but you kind of get the picture that there's a lot of these decorative scenes showing the king being glorious. Here's the king again. There's a fragment, whatever survived from the excavations. This is what's called a sacred tree. And on top of here, you see a winged disc, which is typical in the ancient Near East. If it was Persian, it could have been Ahura Mazda, and if it's Babylonian, it can be Marduk, whoever it is. It would be the winged sun disk. You also find this in ancient Egypt. The winged sun disk is putting the god, the supreme god of this particular city and this culture, which in this case is Assyria, and it's there on top of the tree. The winged sun disk looks like the one above Yahweh bowing, and that's because when Yahweh is bowing to the king of Assyria, he is surrendering to the Assyrian king, who is representing the Assyrian gods who are above everything. And the Assyrian king, by conquering all these countries, was glorifying the Assyrian god, who was called Ashur. And so this is indeed the same things. Thanks, Timo, for pointing that out. Okay, so and here there's some kind of sacred tree, and there's some sort of ceremony where the king is standing here. And this, again, it has to do with fortifying the king's divine rulership and divine right. Okay, reminds me of the Nazis. The swastika, the Nazis used the eagle, which came from the Roman Empire, but the swastika is a geometric shape which is found. It's been around for over 1,000 years. It's not something that's particularly Nazi. It's just the question is where they got it from is a different question. One more thing before we move on. I actually want to take you to the next floor above before we move on in here. This is a really cool scene that's going on over here. Okay, in the Beit HaMikdash, the Nazis, the swastika as a design, perhaps, I don't know. I would have to hear more about that. Very cool. Like in the second temple, where you find parts from the Stoa in the second temple, where there's designs. I'm going on a riff with David Wilner, but basically the geometric shape which creates a swastika is a very famous one. It's also in Greco-Roman art. It's in Herodian art. It's very famous. You're going to see it a lot. Okay. Okay. Awesome. So this one scene I want to show you over here. Here's the king holding some sort of chalice, and it's actually what's called a fiale. It's kind of drinking bowl, and in front of him is an attendant with some kind of sprinkler, either sprinkling incense on him or keeping flies away as a fly swatter. There's two possibilities of what it is. You're going to see that sometimes it doesn't make sense that it's a fly swatter because he's standing behind the king in different places. Either way, it can go either way. But the cool thing is, if you look at this bow, look how he's holding an arrow. You see there's a bow, not a bow, an arrow, a bow. Here's a bow. So the king is holding a bow in one hand, and he's holding a chalice in the other hand. In other words, he's trying to show himself as both a warrior and also as a devout servant of Ashur, which is really part of his legitimacy. And it's kind of cool because this is showing you that there's this combination of war and piety. Like he's a big tzaddik, you know. And the whole thing about keeping the flies out of the drink kind of reminds us of the Sar HaMashkim, the cupbearer of Paro, with the story of Yosef in jail, right, where he was just negligent about a fly getting into the drink. So here you have a fly swatter keeping flies out of the drink. It's kind of cool. But okay, you kind of get the picture. And I want to take us further because we can really spend all day here. And I want to take you to a bit of a different story. So now, to transition us, I'm going to take us into what's called the Neo-Assyrian Empire and what exactly that means. So here's our Kirk monolith again. And what do we mean by the Neo-Assyrian Empire? The Neo-Assyrian Empire is, of course, named so by historians, not by the Assyrians themselves, but it's demarking a particular period, a stage in the Assyrian kingdom in which they expanded from being a big, powerful kingdom in the region called a regional kingdom to becoming empire. And this is the first world empire, arguably. I'm not going to get into the Sumerian. There's different distinctions. The point is that there is something about the way they run the kingdom which makes them qualitatively different than what things were like beforehand in the ancient Near East. And so this is the Tiglath-Pileser III, or Tiglath-Pileser, who we're going to read about very soon, is when the Assyrian Empire changes their nature and they become very, very expansionist. They conquer many countries, and they have a system of vassals, which we'll discuss a little bit more in depth. And there's a whole bunch of kings. You notice that there's, after Ashurbanipal, there's blank, but there's actually a few more. But after Ashurbanipal, who we will soon mention, it's sort of, the Assyrian Empire sort of declines and loses its power, and the Assyrian Empire sort of loses to Babylon and the Medes, and it's all over. So Ashurbanipal is the last one I'm going to mention here for our purposes. Now let's get into it. Just so we have a framework, what's going on in Yehuda before we get into the story. So in Judah, we have Uzziah, Yotam. This is like the time of Yeshayahu Hanavi, who we will quote later. Ahaz is the first Jewish king of Judea, to become a vassal, a puppet king to the kingdom of Assyria. Hold on. I keep on admitting Henry Nash, and he never seems to be able to get in. I don't know what's going on. Okay. On the other hand, we have the last kings of Israel, and we're going to be talking specifically about Pekach, who's nothing to do with Pekachiah. This is like a whole line of kings who each one assassinated the previous one. It's a pretty messy story in the kingdom of Israel. And Hoshea ben Elah is the last king of Israel, and he's destroyed by the Assyrian Empire, by several different Assyrian kings in several different campaigns, but eventually the kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes, are decimated. And that's a story we're going to get into later, okay? Ignore. I'm going to go back. Let's go back to the museum. Now here I'm going to be doing a little bit of a jump, so I'm going to explain to you what I'm doing, but right over here, I'm going to be jumping to the 3rd floor. Oh, I'm already here. Excellent. I don't have to do too much. I'm now on the 3rd floor. We're in ancient Near East. We're looking at stuff from Ur Kasdim. There's a lot of fun here. I don't want to take too much of your time. Let's move in. Okay. Sometimes you get sort of like these bugs where you can't move. Okay. If you move a little bit further, you're going to get to see the Cyrus cylinder, but that's a story for another time. Okay. Where are we? Excellent. Okay, so what is an empire? What makes an empire? What makes an empire, first and foremost, is an administration, right? You have to have a way of record keeping in order to manage such a massive system of vassal kings who need to be paying taxes and need to be contributing to your campaigns and sending X number of chariots and infantry to, and whatever it is that you're doing, you need to keep track of things. And the Assyrians pretty much set the stage for all of the empires to come in how they kept track of things. Now, writing documents wasn't so new. I mean, this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years beforehand, but it's how they did it. What you are looking at right now is a sample of Ashurbanipal's library. Now, here's a cool thing about Google Earth. If you look at the very bottom on the right, it tells you when this image was captured. In other words, when Google had their little carts with the 360 cameras going through the museum. And that was in August of 2015. So you get to see the museum 5 years ago and not what it looks like today. Now, a lot of the stuff was not on display for a while because they had a bigger exhibition, which I didn't visit. My father here did visit. It was called I Am Ashurbanipal, King of Assyria, King of the World. And Ashurbanipal, who was the last of the mighty Neo-Assyrian kings, had a massive library. And by the way, there is an Ashurbanipal library project, which they talk about here, and I can send you the link later if you ask me, where they've digitized about and recorded about 30,000 of these cuneiform tablets. Now, I think Rob asked me about the flood myth, Gilgamesh. Here it is. This one isn't Gilgamesh. This is one of the flood myths. Take a look. King Ashurbanipal's flood tablet. Is this actually Gilgamesh? Utnapishtim, yes, it is. So this is a piece of the Epic of Gilgamesh. They discovered a fifth piece not a few years ago. But anyway, this is part of the flood myth, and it was part of the library. And this library kept track of cultural knowledge, of royal documents, all kinds of other things. So keeping that tight administration was one. Now, let's move on to the other one. Where are we? Okay, we're zigzagging around. Okay, campaigns and warfare. So let's take a close look. What we are looking at right now, and by the way, I just discovered that also in London, they have a Sackler wing. So Sackler is a big deal right now in America with the opioid crisis, and people want to take the name off the Met. It's a big deal. The Guggenheim and so on. But anyway, here we are. So let's take a look. This is an Assyrian campaign into into Egypt, which was run by the Cushites, by the Nubians. And this is an interesting story because the very fact that the Assyrians invaded Egypt was a result of the Egyptian alliance with Hezekiah when he was rebelling against the Assyrians, as we shall see. So this is out of order chronologically in terms of the story, but I want you to see it, that this is a very important story because I mentioned they use camels and so on. Let's take a look at a few of the things that are going on in Assyrian warfare, and then we'll define it a little bit more. Here's an Assyrian warrior who's somehow crumbling the fortifications of the city. People are falling down. And here's Assyrian warriors climbing up. Some of them hold shields and spears. Some of them are holding bows and are shooting arrows. And here's the defenders fighting as much as they can. This is in Egypt, this whole story. And here they are running up. There's archers covering the people. And here's a big shield. This shield, it's pointing the wrong way. I don't know why, but, and here's a lot of Nubians. You can kind of tell that they're definitely not, like we'll see in the pictures of Judeans and so on. You see that they're sort of they're bare-chested, they're wearing some kind of skin and they're wearing some kind of feather on their head. I mean, it's kind of cool how they did that. And the Assyrians here are taking these captives away. And we know, in fact, historically, that after the Egyptians were invaded by Assyria, the invading Nubian dynasty, the 25th dynasty, which were they were Cushites from Eretz Kush, who were ruling Egypt. They were banished from the land and were placed by a weaker local dynasty called the Sais dynasty, and that begins a different dynasty, the 26th dynasty or the late period. Look at this Assyrian soldier. He's holding the head of a Nubian above them. He's like, keep moving or that's what's going to happen to you. And this guy's holding a knife in his hand. You know what's coming. Probably the Nile. So their warfare. Now, the Assyrian warfare, I want to show you one more. Here's a quiver where they held the arrows inside it. And there's a little stick here, kind of a pin that would hold the quiver together. And you see another scene. Now, what's going on here, it's going to help us understand better what we're going to see in the throne room of Sennacherib very soon. Here is one soldier who's holding a full-bodied height shield, which is called in Hebrew tzina, and he has a short sword in his hand, and he's covering for his friend who's shooting arrows. And so this is called in Tanakh, it's called noseh keshet v'tzina, because one has a keshet and one has a tzina, and they come in pairs. So they have this very sophisticated kind of system of different types of warfare, which they combine into an army, which we're going to talk about. And here's some arrowheads. So we're looking at some stuff from Assyria, which is really cool. We're about to move on, but now let's just move back to the slideshow so we can kind of get an idea. So how did the Assyrian Empire conquer such a wide area? You're looking at the Assyrian Empire the Neo-Assyrian Empire is the green part. The part beforehand is like when it just is a little bit before that. So you're looking at the tremendous difference between how the Assyrian Empire started off and how they ended off at their height with Ashurbanipal before they started declining. How were they able to control such a massive territory all the way to the Persian Gulf? So let's revisit that. First of all, the administration and record keeping. This is a very, very, very important aspect. And this is how they set the stage, as I mentioned, for the future empires to come. The second one was innovation and battle tactics. So you can see this is just a sample of the Assyrians attacking a palace, and there's people on the top here. Oh, I put the title here, you can't see it. Being impaled, there's a tank here, there's archers, and so on. So we're going to get into that a little bit more in detail soon. But one last thing has to do with mass deportation. Now, this piece is currently not on display at the Met because there's a temporary exhibit, but this is a piece from Nineveh, and it's showing you the storming of a citadel, and it's from the palace of Sennacherib, which is really fascinating. And what it shows you here is an example of Assyrian art. First of all, where in the foreground, you have deportees who are sort of being led into captivity. And in the background, you have the battle on the city. And to the right, you can see there's these, it looks like there's bricks, but it's actually a siege ramp, which is where they would pour stones onto the rocks, onto the ground, and to sort of be able to make a ramp, a solela, and to push up that ramp, these siege tanks, which would have battling rams, and they would crumble the city fortifications. So now the point here is the deportees, mass deportation. Now, think about it this way. If you're going to come and conquer another population, right, and you're going to place your own rulers on top of them, eventually you're going to have a lot of resentment, you're going to have pushback, and you're going to have rebellion. And so the energy you're going to need to expend onto maintaining control of the area basically limits how far you can spread yourself, which is why no country was able to spread themselves as far as the Assyrians did. But the Assyrians innovated and came up with a new method, and Sennacherib boasts about it later on, and he says, and this actually has some halachic implications, which I'll mention in a moment. So Sennacherib says, I am so smart. Look what I have done. I have plundered all of the treasures of countries. I have erased the borders of people. Now, what does that mean, erase the borders? Professor Mordechai Kogan of Haifa University refers to this as the era of mass deportations, because what the Assyrians did is they completely changed the demographics of the ancient Near East. What they did, instead of conquering and putting their own rulers on an indigenous population, what they did instead is shuffle everybody all over the place. And what they achieved by that is, first of all, you don't know how to run away, you don't know where you are, you're completely dependent on the authorities, and you don't have any allegiances to the country you're in because you're not in your country. And they're able to use your profession for benefit, for cheaper labor for the empire. And so what you end up having is just a massive population which is displaced, which don't belong anywhere. And so you repopulate them and you repatriate them, and now you're part of the Assyrian Empire. Now you pay allegiance to the Assyrian Empire, and so you're no longer defending your homeland because you don't have a homeland. So this was a brilliant strategy which enabled them to control a massive population, but also had a devastating effect. For example, the 10 lost tribes, the reason they're so utterly lost is because of this ingenious and evil plan of how to make sure that they could never find their way back. So that's another story hopefully we'll get to. But what we have happening here is a different method of conquering. And so we're going to get into the story now. I just wanted to sort of introduce the rise of Assyria. The Neo-Assyrian Empire is sort of foreshadowed in Yeshayahu by saying, Ho Ashur shevet api, umateu beyadam za'ami. Assyria is the rod or the staff of my anger, in whose hand as a staff is my fury. And so Assyria is really sort of the tool which Hashem uses to take care of all kinds of problems that we have in Malchut Yisrael and Malchut Yehuda, as we shall see. So let's get into it. We've seen this already. We don't need to go back to that. I'm just getting into the first story. We're going to get back into the museum in just a moment. So the first encounter that we have with the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which is of course Tiglat-Pileser, or Tugul-Dipulu-Usu III, happens here with Ahaz. Ahaz, the father of the great righteous king Tzaddik Hezekiah, but Ahaz not so great. And Ahaz was attacked by two other kings, as you see on the top in Pasuk Hey, Retzin, the king of Aram, and Pekach ben Ramaliah, the king of Israel, and according to Assyrian documents, also Hiram, the king of Tzor from the Phoenicians. They basically had a coalition to attack Ahaz. And why are they attacking Ahaz? Because Ahaz wanted to ally himself with the Assyrian Empire, and the local kingdoms wanted to keep the Assyrian influence out. Now, under normal circumstances, this is a normal thing to do. You have coalitions together. You work together in order to keep the area free from the influence of somebody else. Except that this invader, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, is something that the world has never seen before, and so people were falling. They were being conquered by the Assyrian Empire. They were just not prepared. This is not just another attack. This is something completely different. And so Ahaz, in Pasuk Hey, Pasuk Zayin, in 7, Yishlach Ahaz malachim el Tiglat-Pileser melech Ashur. He sends an envoy to Tiglat-Pileser, the king of Assyria, to say as follows: Lemor avdecha uvincha ani. I am your servant and I am your son. I want you to save me from Aram and from Israel. Now, consider for a moment, you want the help of another kingdom, right? You send them certain money, and this happens in other instances throughout Tanakh. Melech Aram has been hired against us, and the Chittim are hired against us, and fine, you have these geopolitics, okay. So here I'm going to pay you money, and we see in Pasuk Chet that he does give money to Tiglath-Pileser. But to say Avdecha Ubincha Ani is a declaration which defines a certain relationship. First of all, the relationship of a servant. I will be beneath you. I will serve you, which means I will call you king. I will pay you taxes, whatever it requires. Uvincha, I am your son. What does it mean I am your son? And I'm quoting my father here who taught me this. It's that I want to be part of the family. I want to be part of the Assyrian Empire. I want to be under your protection. And I also want some of the goods that come in with the relationship with the Assyrian Empire. Now, it didn't turn out as good for Ahaz as he thought, but at least he was saved. And what I just wanted to, I want to take you now into the museum. Here's our little surprise. We're going to go back to the British Museum, but I briefly wanted to take you to the Israel Museum and show you what you can only see in the Israel Museum. So let's go quickly into the Israel Museum. Okay, here we are. Let's move to map mode. And okay, click this little yellow guy, and now every place that has Google Street View is going to show up. And I want to go right here, right or here. Very, very close. I'm almost there. Next corner, right here. Here we are. Now, this is a copy. We're going to actually see the original, so that's not what interests me right now. What interests me is a couple of things in there. Number one, this jug. Okay, this jug, which has been painstakingly reconstructed. Think of those little gift kits of an archaeological jar that you have to put together, kind of those activities. So this is archaeology, and this is a massive jar which had 4 handles on each side. And I'm going to show you in a moment what was stamped on them, but these jars are going to be very, very important. Number one is these jars. Number two is this replica of a plaque, which the original is currently in the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. So you have to make special reservations to see it, but first let's make sure that we can actually fly there. And this was something we're going to talk about in a moment, in just a bit, okay? So here we are looking at these jars. This is, of course, you know by now, at this point you should be experts. This is Assyrian relief from something, and we're going to talk about that very, very soon, okay? All right, so let's get into it. What is this thing? What are these jars? Okay, so this is the, my father was quoting Professor Oded Lifshitz. Okay, excellent, of Tel Aviv University. So this is the jar we're looking at. This is from the Israel Museum's website. You can see it's about 64 centimeters high. This is very, very big. And those handles, the jug handles, are the key. If you look up close on the jug handle, I know you're not used to reading a Ktav Ivri or ancient Hebrew yet, but I'm going to show it to you on the top. So this is a stamp which has a very peculiarly Egyptian-looking symbol. It's a beetle with wings on it, or a winged sun disk. And if you look at the top, you'll see the winged sun disk. And yep, you've seen winged sun disks before. What is this doing on something on a jug handle, which is found in Lachish and found in other important cities under the kingdom of Yehuda? Really, really cool. So first of all, just to point out before we explain like what's the importance of it. So what it says here in Ktav Ivri, you can look on the top. This looks like the letter L. That looks a little bit like an M. Here's another L, and here's like the letter K in a sort of a distorted on the side way. That's LMLK, Lamelech in ancient Hebrew. And on the bottom it says Hebron, which is an important city, of course, in the south of Yehuda. Now, there's other variations of what these have said. These say, either they say Lamelech Mamshit, Lamelech Zif, or Lamelech Socho. Now, all of these are the only variations we know. 3 out of the 4 cities we identify. We know the city Hebron, we know Zif, we know Socho. We're not sure what Mamshit or Mamshat is, but in any event, these are important administrative cities in the kingdom of Yehuda. Now, why is all of this? This is a picture I took at the Harvard Semitic Museum, which just changed its museum to the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East, I think. So I took this picture a while ago, and this shows you other variations of stamps. Now, why is this important? Think for a moment. What are jars used for? Big jars like that. They're obviously used for storage. and think about where you find them. You find them in a place which is clearly a powerful city, an important city, an administrative center. So there's something about that going on. So you have to play detective here. Now, the stamps on it, the archaeologists have two options of where they are dated to. They're either Ahaz, who we just read about, or his son Hezekiah. And now what is going on here? If you have a royal seal, which is saying this belongs to the king, LMLK, and it's a particular city, then that's telling you that the king is basically signing on something, being real, being true, or something like that. Now, if these jars are used for storage and the king is signing on them, it must be that the king is saying this is guaranteed to contain what it has, and so on. And so what archaeologists suggest is that this is a form of tax paying to the Assyrian Empire. And what's happening is that now that Ahaz has become a vassal to the kingdom of Assyria, you need to reorganize your kingdom to fit into an empire. And so you have to have a certain kind of administration and collect taxes and then pay those taxes to Assyria periodically, annually, kishana b'shana. And so these are showing us that Ahaz is now collecting taxes in order to be part of the Assyrian Empire as he is. He's a vassal to Assyria. Now, according to, my father told me this is recent, this is, I think, also what Lipschitz is, that it's also possibly Hezekiah who rebelled against Assyria, as we shall see, and he said, LaMelech Chevron, I am the king, and this is me collecting the taxes for my country and not to pay to somebody else. So we'll get to that in a moment, but this is just a map that shows you all the locations in which these LaMelech jug handles have been found, and more have been found since this map, which is a few years old, like in Beit Shemesh and so on, where my father dug in the summer, just to mention that. Okay, so let's go back to the museum. Okay. Now you see this is a replica of what we're actually going to see now in the British Museum. Okay, I hope you're not getting too dizzy. And here we go. Boom, we are in the British Museum. Okay, we need to go right here. You see where it says Assyria, Assyria Nimrud, Assyria Nineveh? This is where we want to go. Okay, take that little guy and Assyria Nineveh. Boom. We're on the wrong floor. 0. We are in Egypt. Ha, okay, let's move a little bit further. Okay. All right, here we are. Now, this is where I wanted to take you. We are right now about to go into the throne room, one second, of Sennacherib. We're going to get into the story in a moment. Okay, but you're looking here, let's see, you can click on that. South panel, cool. You can also click on these things and look up. Here's more scenes of people building stuff, and this is a construction scene that's less interesting to us right now. We can spend all day there. I want to take you into this room. Ha, wrong room. Okay. A lot of more battle scenes. We need to walk through walls here. There you go. Well, this is fun. You get to play around with this, and sometimes you get stuck inside a wall. It kind of feels like Harry Potter. You know, you never know where you're going to show up. Okay. Okay, Assyria, Nineveh. Now, Nineveh, we know the story of Nineveh from the story of Yonah, because Yonah has to go to the capital, Nineveh, which is kind of cool, because Nineveh was only a capital for a short period of time. So you can kind of know that it's around this period of time of Sennacherib and so on. Okay, let's look at some more stuff. Here we are. Okay, perfect. So we're about to go into, well, they kind of transported it, but this is the throne room of Sennacherib who attacked Hezekiah. We're about to get to there, but I want to point out what's going on here. Okay, so let's move into this room. We're looking at the throne room of Hezekiah, of Sennacherib. Let's see, perfect. Okay, so we're going to get into the story, but you see here a procession of a lot of different people who are being paraded somewhere now, paraded like captives of war. I see somebody's drawing on it. I can stop moving, but here. Okay. Hold on, let's see comments. Yes, we are in room 10 is Ashurbanipal's lion hunt. I'm thinking of going there in a bit. What I want to point out to you right over here, this king who's, let me just erase that. Hold on. Clear. Okay. So this king who you're looking at, his face is, he's been defaced. And the reason for that is because in Assyrian what am I doing? In Assyrian, the way Assyrians believed things were is that if you wanted to destroy a person's memory and name, you simply erase their face. And so this king sitting here is actually Sennacherib, and it says over here, the king, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, king of the world, sits on his throne as the spoils of Lachish are paraded before him. And so we're going to talk about what exactly is going on in Lachish. But this is King Sennacherib who Hezekiah rebelled against. And here you see another scene of him on, here's a parasol, he's on his chariot. There's a lot of different things going on here. You can see a city being built. We're not going to look at that city right now. I want you to see this, what's going on here. So we spoke about Assyrian warfare. Sennacherib is about to launch an attack on Hezekiah, as we shall see, after the 10 tribes are already destroyed. This is just a sample of some of the pictures of what's going on. These are soldiers with sling stones, and you see there's double soldiers. You see archers, and again the shields, romach v'tzina, music instruments, playing instruments. You know, you have music in war, but I think that those are captive actually. And here is some of the instruments of war. You see sling stones. So I can get close. Yeah, arrowheads and so on. Scary stuff. I think at this point in time, the cylinder wasn't here. Okay. Now let's get into what exactly is going on here. Okay. So we're going to go really, we're wrapping beginning to wrap up. I just want to kind of take us to this point in time so we can get back into it. So we have a story, we'll hear the story, I'm going to kind of skip through it, but Tiglath-Pileser, as a result of his allegiance with Hezekiah, he comes to his aid, and he demolishes in 2 different waves 2/3 of the 10 tribes of the kingdom of Israel. And it mentions here the places where he took them to and where he took them from and so on. But this is in the days of Pekach melech Israel, bat Tiglath-Pileser melech Ashur, and he took all these different places. And he replaced Pekach ben Ramayahu and put instead of him Hoshea ben Elah. And Hoshea ben Elah was usurped the throne. Now, skip forward a few more years, like 9 more years, and Ahaz is still the king of Yehuda, and Hoshea ben Elah began to rule for 9 years, and he ended up Shalmaneser. This is Shalmaneser the 5th, as we know from history. This Shalmaneser caught Hoshea ben Elah basically rebelling against him, defying him by sending an envoy to a king of Egypt, which is, instead of paying him his tribute every single year, which is how you really rebel against an emperor. You just say, I'm not paying your taxes anymore. I have a better insurance. I have the people here. I have Egypt, and they're a better insurance than you because you're far away and you're not going to get to my help, and it's going to take forever to get your help, right? And so fine. So what we have as a result of this is that at the final year of Hoshea ben Elah, the last year of the kingdom of Israel, the king of Assyria captures Samaria, Shomron, and deports all of the Israelites to Assyria, and he spreads them throughout the empire. Now, I'm going to show you just what happens instead. He brings people from throughout the empire and repopulates the area of Samaria. So this is what they did, as we mentioned, the mass population. And so this map kind of shows you, based on the pasuk, the different layers of deportation that happened, because it happened in several different waves. There's Tiglath-Pileser, there's Shalmaneser, and there's Sargon, who were all involved in this long, decade-long bureaucratic process of repopulating the Assyrian Empire. Okay, now Hezekiah rebels. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit because I want to take you more to the museum. But here's the story we're talking about. Hezekiah rebels against the king of Assyria, who happens to be at this time Sargon. But Sargon dies in battle. Nobody knows what's going on, and meanwhile he's replaced by Sennacherib. But what happens is that Hezekiah hedges his bets. He says, "Looks like a good time to rebel. I'm not going to pay taxes to you. I'm dealing with Egypt and with Babylon, and you're out of the picture." And Assyria ended up rebuilding itself and coming for revenge. And so here's a story I want to share with you from my backyard before we get into the museum. And so this wall is literally underneath my house. Those stairs go straight up to my parents' apartment building, where, if my father's still watching, he's sitting right on top of this. Now, this wall is one of 2 preparations which Hezekiah did, physical preparations in the city of Jerusalem in anticipation of the Assyrian revolt, and so invasion. And so the first thing he does, he builds a wall. Now, this massive wall was surrounding the western part of Jerusalem, which was at the time unwalled. That's what's today's old city, is the west of the Temple Mount, which was the highest point in the city earlier on. And so this wall is sort of defending the unwalled houses. And now some of these houses actually had to sort of clear out, and this wall runs through some of those houses. It's a little hard to see them to the right here, but that's one of the ways this was identified after the 6-Day War, when this was excavated and all of this became revealed. And so this is a massive wall. That ruler you're seeing in the middle is about the height of the wall. And this is one of the things that Hezekiah did to prepare for the Assyrian invasion. The next thing he does, of course, if you've been to the Old City, you've been to the City of David National Park, you've been underwater in the Shiloh, in the Gihon Spring, like Nikbat Hezekiah, that's the second thing he did. So this picture you're looking at is a rough estimation of the city of Jerusalem at the time of King David. And of course, it's not so accurate, but it's a good it's an estimate of at least the location of the city to the southern slope of the Temple Mount. And to the right is an early Bronze Age citadel, which is protecting the natural spring, which was the water source of the city. Now, Hezekiah said to himself, listen, that's the highlighted pasuk, I don't want the kings of Assyria to come and to find all this water, so I'm going to redirect the water into the city. And this is what he does. This is the famous image, the iconic image of the Gihon Spring, Hezekiah's water cistern. This is the entrance when you come in from the visitor center. And I want to show you, first of all, that plaque. So that plaque, which I showed you a replica of in the Israel Museum, is the Nikbat Shiloh plaque. This is an inscription which is found at that point towards the end, where the people who were cutting through the stone underground, through the rock, met each other. And you can see that the chiseling direction sort of meeting, two different directions. And at that point that they met, they made this inscription, which sort of, it's written in ancient Hebrew. You can get used to reading it. And it talks about that dramatic moment that they meet and the water comes flowing in. You just see there's somebody. Okay, I'm going back in. All right, and this is what it looks like on the exit. And what's fun about this is where we would go on Rosh Hashanah for tashlich. We would throw the breadcrumbs here, that thing we do on Rosh Hashanah. This is it. This is like a friendly neighborhood place. This is like a usual place that we go as Old City residents. So this is kind of fun. Okay, now I just took you into the destruction of Lachish, and I want to take you back to there to appreciate that. Now I showed you siege ramps. This is the city of Lachish. Now Lachish and Azekah is also an important city in this context. When Hezekiah rebelled against Sennacherib came and he didn't just tax him. I mean, he almost destroyed the kingdom of Yehuda. He comes in around to the southwest. He conquers, destroys the coastline, cutting off Jerusalem from its supply line and demoralizing Jerusalem, and then finally advancing towards Jerusalem, which he actually failed in conquering. But that was where he ended up turning around and going back to Assyria. But this is the city of Lachish, and you can see this looks like gravel over here. This is the remnants of the Assyrian siege ramp, which you can visibly see from the parking lot of the Lachish, Tel Lachish, the national park. Now, when Sennacherib came, I just want to mention two important cities. This is from later on, from Nebuchadnezzar. I just wanted you to see this verse, because as Nebuchadnezzar, 100 and some years later, comes and destroys the Beit HaMikdash, destroys the kingdom of Yehuda, the last standing cities, the last fortified cities are Lachish and Azekah. So he was waging war against Lachish and Azekah. These are powerful fortified cities. So if you go backwards and you see this powerful city, this is an incredible fortress which lasted for a long time against Nebuchadnezzar, and also lasted against Sennacherib. So this is one. And this is the other one. This is actually taken last summer. This is from the point on which, according to the descriptions in Sennacherib's own writings, Sennacherib stood while surveying the destruction of Lachish. And this is in Azekah. And so you're looking at these two places in the Shephelah and Yehuda, and then upper close to Beit Shemesh, which were powerful defense lines into the hill land if you're coming to invade. So this is Lachish and Yehuda. I just thought that would be really cool. This is in 2012 when I was digging there in Azekah. I dug again last summer for a couple of days, but it's a great place to visit. Now let's go back to the museum. We'll wrap up and we'll have some time for questions. So this entire room is showing you a massive campaign in the year 701 BCE. So that's 2,700 years ago and change. This is the Assyrian mighty army coming to conquer the kingdom of Yehuda, who dared to rebel against the Assyrians And look at all this firepower, layers and layers of archers, soldiers with lances and shields. There's also psychological warfare. I want to show you further up close. Let's get it closer and see what's going on. This is all celebrating the destruction of the city of Lachish. That's how much of a big deal this was. So here's the siege ramps, and here is like foreground, background. That's how the Assyrians kind of did it. Here are deportees who are leaving, mostly women and children, who are leaving and being led into captivity by Assyria. And in the meanwhile, here's the battle. The battle is raging on. You can almost, hear the drama. There's attack going on. And look at this. There's Jews who are being impaled to kind of demoralize the people inside the city. Look what happened to these guys. You sure you want to fight us? Really weakens them. And so this is all leading up to the destruction of Lachish. Now look at this. Here's a tank. This tank, can you see? Yes, look, if you look very carefully, let me try to draw so you can see it, because this is really worth seeing. Okay, good. So this is a tank. Okay, this is a tank. And out of the tank on the top here, second, this is a person standing here with some kind of big ladle pouring water onto this battling ram. Now, the purpose of the battling ram, of course, is to smash into the fortifications and knock down the wall. But that's not going to be taken lightly, because all of these defenders on the battlements are going to be shooting it with fire arrows to set it ablaze. And so there's this guy pouring water to put out the water from the fire, while this guy is defending it, shooting arrows. And there's people inside pushing this thing, which weighed tons, in order to destroy the city. So this is very, very sophisticated. This is a very sophisticated method of warfare. And at the end of the day, Lachish fell. Lachish was destroyed. And all of these people are paraded and brought before the mighty King Lachish, who is sitting on his throne and watching all the spoils and here and captives. And look, there's a person bowing down before him, and the proud Assyrian soldiers are leading them into captivity. So this is really important to recognize that this is so important, this event in which Hezekiah rebelled against Sennacherib, the Assyrian Empire, and Assyria retaliated, that this is the subject of Sennacherib's throne room in Nineveh, just 12 meters long, of all of this wall. It's really, really fascinating to see all of this. And there's a lot of details and descriptions about it here. See if you can get further in. A little bit more, but okay. So it's getting late. I just want to sort of wrap up here and then leave questions for Q&A. But again, I want you to just imagine that all of this is colorful, so you don't, miss it. It's because, it lost its color over time. Okay, so one last thing, and then I'm going to open up for questions. So back to the slideshow, just one last thing. So Lachish is destroyed, and Hezekiah, this is in verse 14, Hezekiah Melech Yehuda recognizes that it's almost all over, and he says to the king of Assyria, Chatati, shuv me'alai, asher titen alai asa, whatever you want me to pay, I'll pay it. Just stop. And Assyria taxes Hezekiah heavily, 300 talents of gold and 30 talents of silver. And this number is also documented in the Assyrian documents, the Sennacherib's prison, where he discusses this. And so it's really cool to be able to see both the Assyrian documentation of it and how it's written in Tanakh. And what happens is that Assyria ends up leaving Yehuda. Sennacherib actually goes back home and is actually murdered by his own two sons. Okay, and that's it. Esarhaddon, his son, ends up ruling and succeeding him. Now, this is important because think about it like this. If you're going to decorate your throne room after a massive campaign and victory, I mean, you didn't conquer the kingdom. Hezekiah is still in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim has not been damaged by Assyria, right? So what's the point here? So if you think about how you're going to present your losses and your gains to the public, I don't want to talk about what happened in Jerusalem. It was kind of an embarrassment. I mean, if you look at the previous pasuk, this is the famous, mysterious, miraculous death of 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, which happens here outside of the wall, right by my parents' house, right? It happens right there, and he ends up going home in embarrassment. I mean, that's not something I want to talk about. So I'm going to talk about what I did succeed in. I succeeded in destroying the mighty city of Lachish. What's that city again? Oh yeah, Lachish. Okay, you made a big deal about it, so it's a big deal. I mean, it actually was. It was a very important administrative center. But the point is that he doesn't talk about Jerusalem in that sense because he didn't conquer it. He only mentions it in passing, like I captured Hezekiah and his city, but he's not going anywhere. So finally, just one last thing. This is in the Israel Museum, but you really can't see it in the Israel Museum because it's really small, so you can't see it. But this is Hezekiah's seal impression, which he signed on some kind of document, which is really incredible. It has, again, the winged sun disk. We keep on seeing that everywhere we go. And the Egyptian symbol of health, the Ankh. And this says on it, Chizkiyahu Ahaz Melech Yehuda. It belongs to Chizkiyahu, the son of Ahaz, the king of Judah. We also know was deathly ill and miraculously healed. I'm just putting the verses here. And after he healed, so the archaeologists suggest, and this was published by Elat Mazar a few years ago, I think in 2016, this was probably made before, after he healed, to show his health in an international scale. So these symbols of a winged sun disk or the Ankh, which means health, are international symbols of health, not necessarily with any religious significance, but to celebrate his health. And finally, I'm just going to go, when we talk about the destruction of the 10 tribes by Assyria, I just want to wrap up. This is a family friend. This is Hillel Mann, who has the Beit El winery. We had some of his wine on Pesach. And he has a vineyard in what's basically the hills of Samaria. And the hills of Samaria, which is the area which was destroyed and decimated by the Assyrian Empire so thoroughly because of their battle tactics and because of their mass deportation, then when we talk about the destruction of Shomron, it's like you can talk about the destruction of the temple, but it happened twice. And here we are again. We just celebrated Yom Ha'atzmaut. We're about to celebrate Yom Yerushalayim. Where is the kingdom of Israel? Where are the 10 lost tribes? And so Yirmiyahu gives us a powerful prophecy which we read on Rosh Hashanah, the same one where he talks about Rachel mevaka al banea, kol berama nishma nihi b'chi tamrim. Rachel is weeping for her children and they're gone. And God says, I will comfort you and they will come back to their territory. In that verse, Yirmiyahu says, he says the verse which was printed, it's right over here. And I just want to point out just verse 5. Again, you shall plant vineyards in the hills of Samaria. Men shall plant and live to enjoy them. Now, part of the destruction of Samaria was the decadence of the high lifestyle of the upper I'm losing my English. The aristocrats and so on, while there was poverty and corruption in the periphery. And one of the issues was they were drinking wine and so on. Fine, talk about decadence and so on. But this verse is saying, you shall come again and plant vineyards in the hills of Samaria. Now, if you ever want to see a prophecy come true, all you need to do is hold a Beit El winery bottle in your hand. And this is the logo, the emblem, actually is recently replaced, of the Regional Council of Samaria, which has that verse on the bottom. So that recognition that we are living a prophecy after the utter destruction by Assyria, who devastated the 10 tribes and devastated the kingdom of Judah, we come back and celebrate with wineries which are winning gold medals against century-old French wineries in their second year because of the incredible power of the terroir and the altitude and so on in the land of Israel. And so you're really seeing a prophecy come true. It's an amazing thing to see, and I would like to specifically connect that with the Assyrian Empire. So I've just finished sharing my screen. You can unmute yourselves if you have questions. I'm going to read questions that people wrote right now. So Timo, my cousin, do historians make any assumptions about the number of warriors captives based on the images? In other words, is a single warrior? Assyrian art, the question was, can you count the number of soldiers on the palace and extrapolate from there to what actually happened? I would say no. I don't even know if you can count on the numbers that they list, but they do have numbers which are very different from the numbers in Tanakh. But that's a separate discussion. But I will say that the Assyrians pretty much like to represent things. So here's a king, here's a soldier, here's a Nubian, here's a Judean. It wasn't about numbers. It was about the show of power and of their victories. It was more about propaganda. Okay. Why the moved tribes lost their religion identity was this? Oh, wow. The identity of the 10 tribes is a very, very, it's a complex and tricky subject. And what is their religious identity and their ethnic identity? Great question, Ella. Number one, I'll say, is that anything that we identify with Jewish religion was a result of the Babylonian destruction by the men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, who came up with some kind of way to sort of institutionalize Judaism so that certain things aren't forgotten. So prayers and blessing and certain practices that you do in public gatherings and synagogue, that didn't exist back then. So whatever we call Judaism was very, very different then. So whatever it is that they had is already, it's a separate conversation. Not to mention that the word Judaism comes from Judah. and nothing to do with the kingdom of Israel. So they would actually object to the word Judah itself. So what would they have? It's a great question. Whatever it is, it's a very, very primitive form of what we have today, but they definitely, we know from the prophets and so on, they did adhere to different laws. The question was more like the moral issues. And the other question of how were they retained, the 10 tribes weren't, first of all, it was 9 tribes, just call it the 10 tribes. Those tribes weren't all deported at once. It took decades and decades and decades. And by the time the Assyrian Empire started declining, many people of the different tribes were still in place and were able to come back. And we find from Hezekiah, from Hezekiah, that he invited some from Ephraim and so on into Judea. And we find even in the time of the Talmud, the Byzantine period, we find people who are identified with different tribes. And so there are remnants, but there isn't a contingency which like this is the tribe of. It's just people from that tribe. The question of the tribe of Dan and Ethiopian Jews and all that, it's a very, very complex story. I really can't get into it now, but it's a complex one, and there's a lot of material out there about it. So thanks for the question. Michal Shulman, how did Sennacherib create the artwork after the entire that was destroyed? 185,000, if that. So I'll say 2 things. Number one, and I heard this from Dr. Yoshua Berman, that numbers in Tanakh, if you look at it carefully, aren't intended to be taken literally as that number, but the number actually means something. What does 185,000 mean? I don't know, but that's not his entire army. That's just, Sennacherib himself never made it to Jerusalem. He was on Lachish, and he sent Rabshakeh, sent other soldiers there. He wasn't involved in something else. And I can't go into those details, but it has to do with Taharka, the king of Cush, whereas actually at the time he was the general of the Cushite pharaonic dynasty. He was basically an Egyptian. He came to the aid of Hezekiah. That's a different story, but he had a lot more of the army left. He just didn't, the part outside of Jerusalem was destroyed. Okay. Do you have an opinion of which political moves caused the downfall of the Assyrian Empire? Wow. I don't have a good answer for that. I'm not an expert on that. If my father would like to jump on and answer that, that would be cool. Abba?
Can.
Would you like to answer the question? Do we have an opinion on which political moves caused the downfall of the Assyrian Empire?
Overbuilding the cities, absorbing from the periphery without investing in the periphery, a fear of challenging and crushing ongoing fomenting rebellion from Babylonia, since Babylonia was the mother, so to speak. It's as if Washington, D.C. kept on rebelling with New York. New York is the power, but Washington is, our heart, or Boston, right? How could we go and destroy Boston and Washington? Who are we if we destroy the house of Betsy Ross's flag? So they didn't crush Babylonia, and Babylonia successfully organized a rebellion from the power of Assyria by inviting the Medes and others, and they gradually overthrew them. They were overextended, overbuilt, too greedy, and those are some of the factors. And at the end of Nahum, when you read about everybody's going to be happy when you fall because everybody suffered, there's a discussion to which Assyrian king does that refer to, or is it over Assyria? But that terror of Assyria, when people got strong enough, they rebelled. But that's how Professor Oded Lipschitz understands it. They refused to crush Babylon, and ultimately Babylon crushed it.
The question of Rob, you're asking, can I frame the book of Jonah in this history? He goes to Nineveh and Assyria and they repent. Were they political military benefits to Judah? Okay. Was there any political or military benefit to Judah in return for this prophecy? I can discuss the first part of your question. The second part of your question, I don't know. So in terms of the history, so whenever a new king would rise, it's very common that they would move the capital to a different place. Sennacherib moved the capital from Sargon, Dar Sarukin, from a different part, further north, which is his father Sargon, who died in battle. It was such an embarrassment, first of all, that you disassociated with that. You establish a new capital. He moved the capital to the city of Nineveh, which is a very powerful ancient city, but it's only from the time of Hezekiah that it was, in the Neo-Assyrian period, that it was the capital. And so the capital of Assyria, from the point of Hezekiah, and Sennacherib, that's a very short period of time before the downfall of Assyria, that was the capital. So if that's true, then Yonah is going to be fitting somewhere inside there, which means that it's from from Sennacherib onward. We also hear that he was in the temple, and the Talmud Yerushalmi, I think, talks about how he was inspired with Ruach HaKodesh, with divine inspiration when he was in the Simchat Bet HaShoeva, and so like it's in that period of time, when there's a temple. What else can I say about the political benefit to Judah and the return to the? If I understand your question correctly, you're saying like if Assyria repented at the time, did that benefit us in any sort of way? I mean, at the time, things were not so bad with Assyria. Once Assyria made their point, we know that Menashe, for example, was sent certain amount of troops with Assyria who campaigned and invaded Egypt. And you're thinking, like, wasn't Egypt their ally earlier? Well, that's how things work. So you're now, conscripted to the Assyrian army. So, they had there was some kind of relationship of power there. They paid taxes. I don't know. I can't tell you anything more than that. They just gradually declined at a certain point and sort of petered out. Ella, would you recommend reading Zinaida Rogozin, who wrote at the end of the 19th century, as a good source for Assyrian history? That's a question I would defer to my father. I don't know. Abba?
What we know now is so much farther than something in the 19th century. So it's always worth reading the early books and Henry Layard and the original discoveries you gain from that. But it's outdated because we have done so much excavation and research and documents. Just now this week, the 28th volume of the State Archives of Assyria became available online. So we know the workings, we know what they wrote, what they said. They didn't know that then. So it can be interesting. I'm not familiar with her work, but the general rule is you want the latest thing, the latest book in Assyria, not the earliest book.
Like Mark van de Meerup is one that I've been reading, which is generally ancient Near East, but he has a lot of Assyria. Right? I don't know if there's later stuff than that. I think he's in the 90s. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? You can speak. You guys, you can unmute yourselves and speak. It's a lot easier than reading text.
Hey, Nachliel, you referenced decadence in Samaria. Do you have a source for some of those specifics? Is it in Tanakh somewhere?
It's in Hosea. In Hosea, if I'm not mistaken, Sov'ei Yain. Let me. I can actually look it up. I can send it to you later.
Thanks.
I wrote a few articles, which I can also send later if you're interested, on LinkedIn and on my blog, 4 different parts on Assyria. So one of them is Wine and Prophecy, the rebirth of Samaria. And in that article, I quote those verses and relate to the wine specifically. I can send you links to that later.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll do a couple of searches. I'll find it on Safari. Thank you.
Sure.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I just want to go back to the black obelisk of Shalmaneser for a second, just because I want to clarify the timing, if you don't mind. You mentioned that Shalmaneser was from the time of approximately the time of Eliyahu Hanavi, but the Yehu story in Tanakh takes place towards the end of the period of Elisha. So I'm just trying to figure out why Yehu would be bowing. Like, what's the connection of the timing?
Excellent. So in general, the last mission of Eliyahu Hanavi was to anoint Yehu ben Nimshi over king of Israel, to appoint Hazael, the king of Aram, and to appoint Elisha as his successor. So all of this happened after him. I'm just saying it's in the general ballpark within, like, let's say 50, 60 years of that period of time. The king at the time of Eliyahu Hanavi is Ashur-Nasir-Pal II, who's the father of Shalmaneser III. That confusing things a little bit too much. Yeah, so it's that general period of time right after. Yeah, Timo. Oh, thanks for Timo just posted the article which mentions Samaria and wine and all that stuff. It's a fun article. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna say thank you all for joining. It's been a pleasure. You can find me, Nachliel Sullivan. I don't know of any other people with that name, so I think it'll be easy enough to find me. My current website is torahintermedia.com. I have LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, a lot of fun stuff. You can ask questions, you can bother me, you can correct me, and we can, of course, plan some more tours in the future. It's a pleasure. And Henry, I'm glad you made it. I saw you had some technical issues logging in. It's really a pleasure that you made it.
Thank you for this presentation. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Okay. I was trying to get through. I did have a question, but I can ask you later. I mean, if you want me to ask, I can ask, or I can ask you later.
Go for it. I think that'll be the last question, so go for it.
We have genetic testing, which has been used to determine lineage, and is actually, in my understanding, is becoming an important archaeological tool. So the question is, looking at the map of Assyria, has anyone gone out and done genetic testing? I'm specifically thinking of the Kurds who live in the heartland of that map and might be open to doing something like that since they're friendly to Israel, generally speaking. Israel has supported them. Do you know if there's been any genetic testing to identify the 10 lost tribes, or is there any discussion of doing that?
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
I have heard of some things. I don't know about the Kurds specifically, but there's been a lot of genetic testing that has been done. I've participated in one of those tests, which has to do specifically with Kohanim, which was done not only on Jews, but also on Samaritans, which call themselves the Samaritan Israelites, and they have a lot of genetic similarity to Jews. It's very interesting. More than that, that's as far as I know. I know that the topic of genetics is being developed and studied. If there's anyone else who knows anything about it, please jump in.
In the last 10 years, they did genetic testing on the Lebanese people and found that they shared a lot of genetic characteristics with the Phoenicians. So the peoples who lived there long before the Arabs invaded into the area, they still shared many of the genetic markers that we were able to take from the DNA from the remains of the bones of Phoenicians in Sor and in other places in Lebanon.
Wow. Wow. What's this? Well, I'm going to save the chat because there's a lot of good comments here. So you can always check in later. I may post this video a little bit later. I'm going to wait a little bit, but post it later on my YouTube channel, or maybe parts of it. So there's going to be links and all that stuff there. And of course, you can contact me. I'm going to put contact right here so you can reach me. And after that, I'm going to just start wrapping up because it's getting late here. And Stephanie, thank you very much for organizing this.
Yes, thank you so much.
It's really been a pleasure. I'm glad you pushed for this. I'm sad we didn't manage to meet in the Met as planned. Didn't work out, but you and your husband got to sort of a glimpse into Israel in some way vicariously through me or through Assyria or whatever. So
Yep.
A little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Till next time.
Thank you. Thanks much.
You're very welcome.